I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The plumber's words echoed in my head. "Ma'am, don't go down there. Your son is loony." If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because this is the moment everything changed, and I still can't quite believe it happened. Let me back up. My name is Patricia. I'm 67 years old, and I've worked hard my entire life. Raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my husband walked out. Classic story, I know. My son Marcus was always the sensitive one, the artist, the dreamer. While my daughter Jennifer went corporate, Marcus painted, wrote poetry, did installations. My ex-husband used to call him soft. I just called him passionate. But by 2019, Marcus had moved back into the basement of the house I'd owned for 30 years. He was 34 years old. And yes, that bothered me. Not because I didn't love him, but because something seemed off. He'd become obsessed with security, obsessed with watching things. He had cameras pointed at everything. The front door, the driveway, the windows. He said he was working on an art project about surveillance and privacy. I believed him. Mostly. My daughter said he was depressed. Maybe she was right. Depression runs in families, doesn't it? I dealt with it myself. But Marcus had taken it further than that. He'd covered the basement windows with blackout material. He had filing systems that made the FBI look disorganized. And he absolutely would not let me down there. "It's my studio," he'd say. "You know how you don't like people in your space when you're creating." I let it go. He paid rent, insisted on it, actually. He was quiet, kept to himself, didn't cause trouble. In my mind, he was just going through a phase. A very, very long phase. Then came Tuesday, April 16th. That's the date I'll never forget. There was a pipe burst in the basement. Water damage, the worst kind of slow leak that goes unnoticed for weeks until suddenly your foundation is compromised. I called Henderson's Plumbing because they'd always done good work for me. The plumber's name was Dave. He was in his 50s, seen-it-all type. Gruff, professional, no bullshit. He came down to assess the damage while Marcus was upstairs. I showed him the basement, or rather, I tried to. The moment he crossed the threshold, he stopped cold. "What's with all this?" he asked, gesturing at the setup. The cameras, the filing cabinets, the maps on the walls. "My son's art project," I said, already feeling defensive. "He's very creative." Dave looked at me for a long moment. Then he said those words. "Ma'am, don't go down there. Your son is loony." I laughed. Actually laughed. "He's not dangerous, Dave. He's just intense." But Dave wasn't joking. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen a lot. But this looks like someone surveilling this place. Those aren't art cameras, lady. Those are security cameras. And those aren't artistic maps. Those are..." He stopped, looked at the walls more carefully. "Are those addresses?" My stomach dropped. It wasn't a small drop either. It was the kind where you feel your organs rearranging themselves in your abdomen. I went upstairs and asked Marcus directly. My hands were shaking. "Marcus, what's in those filing cabinets?" His face went pale. "Mom, you let someone down there?" "The plumber." "There's a leak." "Marcus, what are you..." "Those are research," he said quickly. "For the art project. I collect information about different things, different cases." "What kind of cases?" He wouldn't answer, and that's when I knew. In that moment, I absolutely knew something was very wrong. I did something I'd never done before. I called the police. This was terrifying for me, you have to understand. I'd raised Marcus to trust me, to come to me with problems. But my maternal instinct, that primal thing that's kept humanity alive for millennia, was screaming at me that this wasn't normal. This wasn't artistic. This wasn't depression having a rough day. A detective came to the house. Not a uniformed officer, but an actual detective. She was about 50, with the kind of tired eyes that come from knowing too much about human nature. Her name was Detective Sarah Kim. She was professional, kind even. But when she went downstairs with me and saw what Marcus had built, she went quiet in a way that made my blood run cold. She called for backup. What happened next was a blur. More police, a warrant. Marcus wasn't arrested, not yet, but they were very interested in his research. The filing cabinets weren't full of art supplies or inspiration. They were full of documents, newspaper clippings, maps, photographs, information about missing people, missing women, to be specific. My son, my sensitive artist boy, had spent the last 8 years compiling information about unsolved cases involving missing women in our state. He'd mapped them, documented them, created what looked like, and what actually was, a serial pattern that the police had somehow missed. The detective came to me upstairs in my living room. I was sitting on the couch I'd had for 20 years, the one with the slightly worn fabric from years of Marcus and Jennifer jumping on it as kids. The detective sat across from me and said something I'll never forget. "Your son isn't dangerous, Mrs. Patterson, but he's definitely obsessed. And that obsession? It might have just solved 5 unsolved disappearances." I stared at her. "What?" "We've been looking for connections between these cases for years. Different jurisdictions, different dates, no obvious link. Your son found the link. He found a pattern. And more than that, he found a connection to a man named Robert Kellerman, a long-haul trucker who died in 2018. The room spun. "My son is not... He didn't... No," Detective Kim said firmly. "He didn't do anything. But I think he knows something. I think he's been trying to understand something. And Mrs. Patterson, I need you to talk to him. Because those women, some of them might still be alive, and your son might be the only person who knows where." My hands were still shaking 2 hours later when I sat down with Marcus in the kitchen. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. "Tell me everything," I said. And he did. "It started 8 years ago," Marcus explained, "when he was volunteering at a community center. A woman named Angela, a volunteer coordinator, had gone missing. She was 31, kind, always brought homemade brownies to volunteer events. One day she was there, and the next day she wasn't. The police treated it as a runaway situation. She had a history of depression. Maybe she'd just left. But Marcus couldn't let it go. He couldn't accept that answer. So he researched. He made inquiries. He started following the thread, and the thread led him to another missing woman. Then another. Then another. What he found was this: a connection between the disappearances and Robert Kellerman, who'd passed through our state regularly on his routes. Some of the women had last been seen near truck stops where Kellerman was documented to be. The timeline fit. The geography fit. But Kellerman was dead, and without evidence, the police couldn't, or wouldn't, pursue it further. "I was trying to prove it," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "I was trying to build a case so solid that they'd have to listen. I was trying to find them, Mom. I was trying to help." I reached across the table and took his hand. My brilliant, obsessive, broken boy. My son who saw injustice and couldn't look away. My son who'd been called crazy for having the kind of integrity that society says you're not supposed to have. "You did help," I told him. "You already did." Because that's the thing about what happened next. What nobody expected. Detective Kim and her team reopened all 5 cases. They cross-referenced Kellerman's movements with the disappearances. They found financial records showing Kellerman had visited motels near where the women were last seen. And then, and this is the part that still makes me cry, they found something in Kellerman's storage unit that his family had never opened. Personal items. And in those items, information that led them to the bodies of 3 of the 5 missing women. 3 women got to come home. 3 families got closure and the chance to bury their daughters properly. Angela, the volunteer coordinator, was one of them. They never did find the other two, but at least there were answers. And it was all because my loony son couldn't stop seeing, couldn't stop noticing, couldn't let injustice just slide by because it was easier. The plumber came back to finish the job a week later. He gave me a look that said he'd heard the news. Most of the town had. It had been on the local stations. Local artists' research helps solve decades-old mystery. Dave didn't apologize exactly, but he did say, "Your son's all right. That took guts." I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in days. "He's always been all right," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." But the real revelation was still coming. The one that would change everything about how I understood this whole situation. Because Marcus's obsession, it wasn't random. And his need to understand these cases, there was a reason for that. A reason that would take me to the darkest place I'd ever been as a mother. And after that, there was redemption. The kind that rewrites your entire story. 2 weeks after the police raid, I finally asked Marcus the question I'd been terrified to ask. We were sitting in the kitchen again. That seemed to be where all our important conversations happened now. Outside, it was a perfect spring day. The kind of day that makes you angry somehow. When everything is beautiful, and you're carrying grief in your chest like a stone. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you care so much about these cases? Why not just let the police do their job?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. He was stirring his coffee, which had gone cold about 10 minutes ago, and not really paying attention to it. He was somewhere else entirely. "Because of Jennifer," he finally said. "My daughter, his sister, the one who worked in finance, who lived in a condo downtown, who I had lunch with every other Sunday." "What about Jennifer?" I asked, though I already felt it. That stone in my chest got heavier. "Do you remember when she was 16? Marcus asked. "When she disappeared for 2 days? I did. God, I did. It was 1997. Jennifer had run away after a fight with me about curfew. Some stupid thing about wanting to go to a party. She came back on her own after 48 hours, ashamed and scared. We never talked about it much after that. Didn't want to dredge it up. Didn't want to make it into something bigger than it was. But I could see now in Marcus's face that it had been something bigger. To him, anyway. "I was 14, Marcus said quietly. "And I was terrified. Not angry at her for leaving. Terrified that she wouldn't come back. That I'd never see her again. That something had happened to her." He paused. And I realized, while I was sitting there for those 2 days, wondering where my sister was, that there were so many people like Mom. So many parents who didn't get their children back. Oh God. I felt tears starting, but I pushed them back. Not yet. "So I started researching," Marcus continued, "just to understand, just to see if I could help somehow. And the more I researched, the more I found. And I found all these patterns, all these connections, and I couldn't stop looking. Because what if? What if I could help someone's mother the way I wanted someone to help you if Jennifer hadn't come home?" I got up and put my arms around my son, my beautiful, broken, brilliant son, and I held him while he cried. That night, I called Jennifer. I told her what Marcus had done. I told her why. And my daughter, who I'd always thought of as the strong one, the practical one, said something that changed everything. "I didn't know he was that scared," she said. "I didn't know it affected him that much." "He loves you," I said. "I know," Jennifer said. "I do now." The media attention was intense for about 3 weeks. Local news, regional news, eventually some national outlets picked it up. Local man's obsessive research solves cold cases. Artist's obsession brings closure to families. The unconventional detective. Marcus hated it. He was interviewed by several journalists, all of whom seemed to want him to be either a hero or a cautionary tale. He was neither, of course. He was just a hurt person who'd channeled his pain into something useful. But something unexpected happened during all that media attention. Other people came forward. Other researchers who'd seen the same patterns but been dismissed by official channels. Other families who'd been looking for answers. And suddenly, there were more cold cases being reopened. More connections being made. What started with Marcus and 5 missing women became something much bigger. Detective Kim called me in early May to tell me that 2 of the other missing women had been located alive. They were in different states, living under assumed names, but they were alive. They'd managed to escape Kellerman years ago, but they'd never come forward because they were terrified. Now, with the official investigation reopened and Kellerman long dead, they felt safe enough to confirm what Marcus had suspected. "Your son did that," Detective Kim said. "He gave those women their lives back." But the part that really got me, the part that I'll remember forever, was when Angela's mother came to the house. She showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't recognize her at first. She was a small woman, probably around my age, with gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much loss. She handed me a casserole. "I wanted to thank him," she said simply. "My daughter. I got to bury my daughter properly, because of your son." I brought her inside and called Marcus down. He came into the living room looking absolutely terrified. He never liked unexpected visitors. But when Angela's mother told him her name, and he realized who she was, something shifted in his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry about Angela." "Don't apologize," she said. "You found her. You brought her home to me." And then she hugged him. And Marcus, my reserved, anxious, beautiful son, hugged her back, and they both cried. I stood in the doorway and watched my child finally understand that his obsession, his pain, his need to see patterns and chaos, all of it had been transformed into something good, into something healing. It wasn't redemption for him. He hadn't done anything wrong. But it was transformation. It was the moment he stopped seeing his sensitivity as a flaw and started seeing it as a gift. By June, things had started to settle down. The media moved on to other stories. The cases were officially reopened and being handled by proper investigative channels. Marcus's name faded from the news cycle, and life returned to something approximating normal. But everything had changed, and I think we all knew it. Marcus got a job offer in July. A victim advocacy organization in the next county over wanted him to work as a research specialist, helping families navigate cold cases and connect with investigative resources. He was hesitant about it at first. He didn't think he had the right qualifications. "You have the most important qualification," I told him. "You care, and you know how to find patterns that matter." He took the job. He moved out of the basement and into a small apartment near the advocacy office. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't impressive by traditional standards. But he was engaged. He was purposeful. He was healing. Jennifer surprised us all by taking up the cases with him. Not officially, she still had her corporate job, but on weekends, she'd come over and help with research, help organize information, help families who didn't know where to start. She said it made her feel like she was using her brain for something that actually mattered. I'm 67 now. It's 2024. I'm looking at my life and thinking about how a broken pipe in April 2019 changed everything. How a plumber's offhand comment, "Your son is loony," became the exact opposite of an insult. How what looked like dysfunction was actually just brilliant people seeing the world differently than everyone else. I think about the 5 women whose cases were reopened. I think about the 3 who came home. I think about the 2 who found safety and peace. I think about their families and the closure that Marcus gave them. And I think about myself and how I almost didn't let my son be himself. How I almost let the world convince me that his intensity was a flaw to be fixed rather than a gift to be nurtured. Here's what I wish I'd understood earlier. Sometimes the people we think are broken are just seeing things the rest of us are too afraid to look at. Sometimes what the world calls loony is actually just committed to truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Sometimes a mother's job isn't to fix her children, but to protect their right to be exactly who they are. Last month, there was another closure. Another family got answers because Marcus had documented something years ago, before it was even relevant. A man in his 30s came forward and said that Marcus's research had given him the courage to finally go to the police about information he'd always had but been too scared to share. Marcus didn't solve that case, but he created the conditions for it to be solved. He built the scaffolding that let the truth finally emerge. I asked him once if he regretted spending those years obsessed with cases that weren't his to solve. If he felt like he'd wasted his time. He thought about it for a while, and then he said something I'll never forget. Those women were all of our responsibility, Mom. Not just theirs, all of ours. And nobody was paying attention. So I paid attention. That's not obsession. That's just seeing. My son isn't loony. He never was. He was just seeing the world. And he cared too much to look away. Now, here's where I need to tell you the part that made me understand something about myself that I'd been avoiding for years. It was 2020, about 8 months after everything with the cases came to light. Marcus was thriving in his job. He'd been recognized by several victim advocacy groups. Jennifer and he had become close, genuinely close, not just siblings, but friends. And I was proud. I was so proud I could barely contain it. But I was also angry. Not at Marcus, at myself. Because I realized something sitting in my therapist's office one afternoon. Yes, I'd finally gotten a therapist, thank you very much. That made me feel ashamed in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'd been ready to dismiss my son. I'd been ready to send him to a doctor, to get him fixed, to make him fit into some normal mold. If that plumber hadn't come by, if that pipe hadn't burst, if Marcus hadn't been forced to reveal what he'd been doing, I would have kept pushing him toward a life that wasn't his. I would have taken his gift and tried to turn it into a liability. How many times, I asked my therapist, do we do that to our children? How many times do we see something in them that doesn't match our expectations, and instead of trying to understand it, we try to change it? My therapist didn't answer. She just let me sit with the question. Around that same time, I started thinking about my own childhood. My mother was a nurse, practical, no nonsense, results-oriented. She'd wanted me to be a nurse too. I had other interests. I wanted to write. I wanted to explore. I wanted to think about big ideas, and not immediately turn them into something productive. She called me a dreamer, not like it was a compliment. I became an accountant, not because I wanted to, but because it was practical, because it was useful, because it was the thing that would make sense to her. And I'd spent 40 years doing something I was decent at, but never loved, never even much liked. And when my children started showing signs of being dreamers, artists, people who saw the world differently, I almost crushed that in them because my mother had crushed it in me. I called Marcus and told him this. I don't know why. We weren't the kind of family that had those conversations usually. But something had shifted after the cases. We'd become more honest with each other. Mom, he said quietly. I know. Jennifer told me you cried during one of our research sessions last month. I did? Yeah. You were looking at a photo of one of the missing women, and you just started crying. You said, I wish I'd seen them like you see them. I wish I'd cared enough to see. I don't remember that, but it sounds like something I would say in a moment of weakness. Do you regret it? Marcus asked. Becoming an accountant? I thought about my 40 years. About the stability I'd provided for him and Jennifer. About the house I'd kept. About the life I'd built, even if it wasn't the life I'd dreamed of. No, I said honestly. But I regret that I didn't encourage you and Jennifer to be different. I regret that I was almost as dismissive as your father was. You weren't dismissive, Marcus said. You were scared. And that's the thing I've learned about being a mother. Fear and love are so intertwined that sometimes you can't tell them apart. Fear can masquerade as practicality. Fear can pretend to be wisdom. Fear can dress up as care. I was scared that Marcus was wasting his life in the basement. I was scared that his obsession meant there was something wrong with him. I was scared that if I acknowledged his gift, I'd have to acknowledge my own lost dreams. So I told myself he was just going through a phase. In the spring of 2021, something unexpected happened. I got contacted by a documentary filmmaker. She'd heard about Marcus's work and wanted to make a film about how ordinary people could help solve cold cases. She wanted to interview me. She wanted Marcus to be the centerpiece. Marcus was immediately resistant, but I encouraged him to do it. And the documentary, which ended up airing on one of the streaming services, changed everything again. It was called The Pattern: How One Man's Obsession Solved 5 Mysteries. And it was good. Really good. The filmmaker was respectful and nuanced. She didn't make Marcus into a hero. She made him human. She showed the years of obsession, the social cost, the isolation. But she also showed the women's families. She showed the closure. She showed the network of people that Marcus's research had created. One scene in particular haunts me, because I'm in it. The filmmaker asked me on camera what I felt when I first realized what Marcus had been doing. I told her the truth. I felt afraid. I felt like I'd failed as a mother, because I hadn't understood my own son. And then I felt angry, not at him, but at a world that calls vision obsession and calls dedication mental illness. My son wasn't sick. He was seeing something we'd all missed. That scene went viral on social media. People started sharing it with the caption, "This is how you raise a world changer." And suddenly, I was getting contacted by other mothers. Mothers of children with different minds. Mothers of autistic kids, anxious kids, kids with ADHD, kids with problems. They were sharing their own stories and saying that my words had given them permission to see their children's differences as strengths instead of deficits. I never expected that. I never expected my guilt and my growth to become something that mattered to other people. But more importantly, it changed how I saw myself. I was no longer just Patricia Patterson, accountant. I became Patricia Patterson, mother of a man who solved cold cases. Mother of a daughter who was learning to use her intelligence for something that mattered. A woman who'd made mistakes, but had the courage to admit them. The documentary came out in May 2021. By September, Marcus had been approached by 3 different organizations offering him speaking engagements. He'd turned down 2, but the third one, a conference for victim advocacy professionals, he'd decided to do. I went with him. I sat in the back of a hotel ballroom while my son stood on a stage and talked about pattern recognition, about the importance of seeing, about how sometimes the people society labels as problems are actually the solution. And I cried, not quietly either. Full-on, ugly cry sobbing, because this was my son. This brilliant, anxious, obsessive man who'd spent 8 years in my basement being called loony by a plumber. And now he was teaching other people how to find missing women. That's when Jennifer leaned over and whispered, "You did good, Mom. You raised him. You protected him long enough for him to protect others." And I realized something in that moment. Being a good mother isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the humility to recognize them and the courage to change. I'd almost failed my son. And I almost failed myself by not pursuing my own dreams. But we both got a second chance. We both learned, just in time, what we were actually capable of. That's the kind of redemption I'm talking about. Not the kind that comes from outside. Not the kind that's given to you. The kind you have to build yourself, with your own hands, moment by moment, choice by choice. By 2023, something fascinating had happened in our family that I never could have predicted. My ex-husband, Marcus and Jennifer's father, the man who'd called Marcus soft all those years ago, came back into our lives. Not romantically. God, no. But he'd seen the documentary. He'd seen Marcus on stage, and something had shifted in him. He came to the house one Saturday afternoon in March. I almost didn't let him in. We'd been divorced for 37 years. 37 years of mostly polite distance, of coordinating holidays, of the kind of civility that comes from not having much to say to each other anymore. But he asked, very quietly, if he could talk to Marcus. I called Marcus downstairs, and I left the room. This was between them. But I stayed close enough to hear what was said. I was wrong, my ex-husband said. I could hear it in his voice, that tone of someone finally admitting something they'd carried for a long time. Marcus didn't answer right away. About you, his father continued. About calling you soft. About suggesting that your sensitivity was weakness. I was. I was afraid that I'd failed as a father. That you were turning out to be something I didn't understand. And instead of trying to understand you, I blamed you for being different. I heard Marcus shift. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, his father said. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. And I wanted to tell you that what you've done, I'm proud of you. I'm so incredibly proud of you. Not because you solved cases, but because you had the courage to be exactly who you are, even when people, even when I, told you that wasn't enough. And that's when I heard something that broke my heart in the best way possible. Marcus crying. I left them alone for another hour. When they came out, Marcus had his arm around his father's shoulder. His father, my ex-husband, the man I'd blamed for so much of what went wrong in this family, was crying too. That afternoon we had lunch together, all of us. My ex-husband, Marcus, Jennifer, and me. It was awkward at first. Jennifer kept trying to fill the silence with small talk. But then my ex said something that made us all pause. I've been thinking about what you said in the documentary, Patricia. About how fear makes us cruel. And I realized I spent 30 years being cruel because I was afraid. Afraid that I wasn't a good enough father. Afraid that I couldn't understand my son. And instead of sitting with that fear and learning, I just pushed him away. I reached across the table and took his hand. Not romantically, but humanly. As two people who'd made mistakes and were finally, at this point in our lives, starting to understand them. We were all afraid, I said. But look at us now, Jennifer said. She was looking at Marcus with such love it almost hurt to witness. We figured it out. Just in time, my ex added. Marcus shook his head. There's no just in time. There's just now, and now is pretty good. The biggest revelation came 6 months later. In September 2023, Marcus got a call that changed everything again. It was from a woman named David. Wait, that's a man's name. But she introduced herself as David, and she said she'd been watching the documentary, and she had something to tell Marcus. She wanted to tell his mother too. I was there when Marcus took the call. I watched his face go pale, and then flush red with emotion. Yes, he kept saying. Yes, of course. Yes, come whenever you want. When he hung up, he turned to me and said, Angela's daughter wants to meet us. Angela, the volunteer coordinator, the first woman Marcus had researched, the first case that had started everything, the woman whose body had been found because of his work. She's alive, Marcus said, almost in disbelief. Angela had a daughter. She was born 9 months after Angela disappeared. Angela never knew. The baby was raised by Angela's sister, but she just found out the truth. She found out about the cases, about the documentary, about how her mother's body was found because of the research, and she wants to meet us. I sat down. I couldn't stand anymore. She wants to thank you, Marcus continued, and now he was really crying. She said she spent her entire life not knowing where she came from, and now she knows. Now she has closure too. I'd known, intellectually, that Marcus's work had affected people's lives. But this was different. This was a child, now a woman in her 20s, who existed because of her mother, whose entire life had been shaped by Marcus's refusal to let injustice slide past unnoticed. David came to see us the following Saturday. She was a tall woman, probably in her mid-20s, with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She reminded me of Angela. Or rather, she reminded me of the photograph of Angela that Marcus had shown me years ago. She hugged Marcus first, just held him for a long time without saying anything. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you for raising him to care. Thank you for not crushing that in him. I exist because your son cared enough to pay attention." And I understood, in that moment, the full weight of what we'd built. Not just closure for Angela's family, not just solved cases and solved mysteries, but an entire lineage of people, David and her future children and their children, whose existence was secured by my son's integrity. I pulled her into my arms and held her the way I should have held Marcus all those years in the basement, the way I should have protected his gift instead of fearing it. David stayed for dinner. She told us about her life. She was studying criminal psychology. She wanted to work in victim advocacy. She said that knowing the truth about her mother, the good things Angela had done, the impact she'd had, the love she'd shown Marcus and the other volunteers, had given her a sense of purpose she'd never had before. "I'm going to help people," David said, "just like Marcus did, just like my mother wanted to do." And I realized that this was the real legacy. Not the solved cases, though those mattered. Not the recognition or the documentary or the speaking engagements. The legacy was that Marcus had shown a whole generation that it was possible to see pain in the world and do something about it. That you didn't have to be FBI or a detective or a professional to make a difference. That sometimes all you needed was to care enough to look. David stayed with us for the weekend. We talked late into the night about her mother, about what it meant to grow up without knowing where you came from, about the power of finally having answers. She showed us photographs of Angela from her high school yearbook, a girl with bright eyes and a gentle smile, the kind of smile that suggested she saw people, the kind of person who would volunteer at community centers and bring homemade brownies. I held that photograph for a long time. This was the woman my son had spent 8 years remembering. This was the woman whose existence, and whose death, had motivated his entire crusade. Angela would never know what her son's love had inspired. But her daughter knew, and so did I. Before David left, she hugged Marcus and said something that made us both cry. "Thank you for remembering my mother. Thank you for not letting her be forgotten." It was a simple thing to say, but it contained the entire weight of what Marcus had accomplished. In a world that discards people, he had chosen to remember them. After David left, I sat with Marcus on the porch. It was a clear night, stars visible above us despite the light pollution from the city. "Do you ever wish you hadn't started researching?" I asked him. "Do you ever wish you could just live a normal life?" He was quiet for a long time. "No," he finally said. "But I wish I'd known sooner that what I do matters, that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't failing at life just because I couldn't fit into the mold everyone else was trying to shove me into." "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have been the person who told you that. Your mother should have been the person who protected that in you." "You're that person now," Marcus said, and he took my hand. And I understood that redemption isn't about undoing your mistakes. It's about what you do after you finally understand them. The next revelation came from an unexpected direction. In October 2023, I got a letter in the mail. Just a regular envelope, postmarked from a town about 2 hours away. Inside was a handwritten note and a photograph. The note was from a woman named Catherine. She said she was a retired police officer who'd worked in criminal investigations for 35 years. She said she'd been following Marcus's work for months, and she had something to tell me. The photograph was of Marcus's basement, specifically his wall of research. But it was annotated, marked up with professional notes and observations. She'd been studying his methodology. Catherine came to the house the following Saturday. She was in her late 60s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades dealing with serious things and had learned not to flinch. "Your son," she said, without preamble, "has more natural investigative talent than most people I've worked with who had actual training." I wasn't sure how to respond. The way he patterns information, the way he connects disparate data points, the way he intuited the truck driver connection without having explicit evidence. She shook her head in admiration. "That's not something you can teach. That's raw talent." Marcus came downstairs. He'd been expecting this meeting, and Catherine spent 3 hours going through his research with him. She pointed out things he'd done right, things he could do better, resources he should be using, official channels that might actually listen to him now. But more importantly, she offered him something that he'd never expected: a consulting contract. Police departments in 3 different states wanted access to his methodology. They wanted to train their investigators using his approach. "I'm not a detective," Marcus said. "No," Catherine agreed. "You're better than a detective. You're someone who sees patterns that are invisible to people who've been trained to think in certain ways. That's valuable. That's incredibly valuable." And that's when I realized something that made me laugh out loud. "What?" Marcus asked, looking at me. "The plumber was right," I said. "You are crazy, but not the way he meant it." And Marcus laughed too, because we both understood now. Crazy isn't the opposite of brilliant. Sometimes it's the same thing. Catherine's work with Marcus led to 2 more cold cases being solved within a year. But more importantly, it gave Marcus the professional validation that he'd never gotten from me, from his father, from the world around him. He wasn't soft. He wasn't loony. He was focused. He was disciplined. He was seeing things that mattered. Here's the part where everything almost fell apart, and we almost lost it all. In early 2024, Marcus got severely depressed, the kind of depression that isn't situational or temporary. The kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and tells you that nothing you do matters, that you're fooling yourself, that this whole thing, the cases, the closure, the work, is just you running from your own failures. He called me one morning and said, "I don't want to do this anymore." For a moment, my heart completely stopped. "Do what?" I asked, though I knew. "Any of it. The work, the speaking, the cases. I can't do it anymore." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep and doesn't respond to rest. I brought him to a doctor, not a plumber, a real doctor, a psychiatrist. And she diagnosed what I'd suspected for years. Marcus had been managing anxiety and mild depression his entire adult life, and the intensity of the last few years had pushed him past what his system could handle. But here's the thing. His medications and his therapy and his recovery weren't about fixing what was wrong with him. They were about supporting what was right with him, about giving him tools to take care of himself so he could continue doing the work that mattered. It took 3 months of treatment before he felt stable enough to go back to his job. And when he did, things were different. He set boundaries. He took breaks. He didn't push himself past the point of breaking anymore. Jennifer and I both made changes too. We checked in on him more. We made sure he knew that we loved him not for what he accomplished, but for who he was. And I made the biggest change of all. In March 2024, I resigned from my accounting job. I'd worked in that field for 40 years. I'd been good at it. I'd provided security for my family. I'd built a stable life. But I'd spent 40 years doing something that didn't light me up, and I'd almost made Marcus do the same thing. Now, at 67 years old, I decided to try something different. I started writing. Not a book about Marcus or the cases. That's his story to tell, not mine. But I started writing essays about motherhood, about fear, about what it means to see your children clearly, about the ways we sometimes love our children so much that we accidentally try to squeeze them into shapes they were never meant to occupy. The first essay I published was titled The Plumber's Warning: How I Almost Missed My Son's Greatness. It went online in April 2024, and it was shared by thousands of people. Parents started reaching out. People with neurodivergent children. People with ambitious children. People with sensitive children. People whose kids didn't fit into the expected boxes. They shared their own stories and asked me questions about how to support children who see the world differently. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something. I had my own experience of almost failing, and my experience of learning to do better. And in that failure and learning, I found purpose. Not a career, necessarily, but a calling. The thing I should have been doing all along. My daughter asked me, "Do you regret it? Your whole life in accounting?" And I thought about it honestly. "No," I said, "because that life gave me Marcus and you. It gave me the house and the stability and the chance to raise you. But I do regret that I didn't find this sooner. That I didn't understand that my own unfulfilled dreams were making me afraid of my children's fulfilled ones." "Better late than never," Jennifer said. "Much better," I agreed. That conversation with Jennifer happened in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd stood 40 years before. A younger woman with 2 small children and a failing marriage, wondering if I'd ruined everything. The same kitchen where I'd confronted Marcus about his filing cabinets. The same kitchen where so much of our family's story had unfolded. I realized, sitting there with my daughter, that the house itself had witnessed our transformation. These walls had held our fears and our secrets. These floors had carried the weight of our misunderstandings. And now, they held something else. Evidence of redemption. Proof that it's never too late to change. Never too late to see. Never too late to love more courageously. The essays I started writing became a book proposal by the end of 2024. A publisher in New York was interested. They wanted to feature the story of Patricia Patterson, the mother who almost failed her exceptional son. They wanted to explore how fear masquerades as love, and how courage can be as simple as saying, "I was wrong." I would be published. At 67 years old, I would finally have something that was entirely mine. Not a career that paid the bills, Marcus and his father helped with that, but a legacy, a voice, a way of being in the world that wasn't about stability or productivity, but about truth. And the most beautiful part? Marcus and Jennifer celebrated with me. They didn't feel overshadowed by my success. They felt proud, because we had finally learned to celebrate each other's victories instead of competing for attention or approval. And now we arrive at the part that I struggled with telling because it feels almost too perfect. But this is where the story actually ends, and it's important you know the truth. In November 2024, I got a call from Detective Sarah Kim. It was the first time we'd spoken in years. She wanted to meet with Marcus and me about something she'd been working on. When we sat down in her office, she placed a file folder on the table. Inside were the cases, all of them. But there was something new. "We found the other 2 women," Detective Kim said simply. "The 2 we couldn't locate initially. They're alive. They're safe. And they came forward because of something Marcus did." I didn't understand. 5 years ago, Marcus published a historical summary of his research on a victim advocacy website. Nobody paid attention to it at the time. But one of these women, Susan, happened to read it. She was living in Pennsylvania under an assumed name, terrified to come forward. But when she read Marcus's work, she recognized herself in it. She realized that someone had been looking for her, that she mattered. Detective Kim pulled out a photo. It was a woman in her 50s, smiling at the camera, alive, free. Susan contacted us last month. She's been in witness protection for 3 years now, safe from the people who hurt her. But she said that knowing someone had cared enough to remember her, even before she came forward, gave her the courage to finally speak. I grabbed Marcus's hand. The other woman, Catherine, did the same thing. Both of them came forward because of the work Marcus did years ago, before they even thought they could be found. And then Detective Kim said something that changed everything. "Patricia, I want you to know something. When I first met you, I thought your son was mentally ill. I genuinely did. I thought his basement was the sign of someone in crisis. But I was wrong. Your son was seeing things we were trained to miss. He was noticing patterns we were too busy to see. He was the most sane person in this entire investigation." I felt Marcus start to cry next to me. "I wanted to apologize for that assumption," Detective Kim continued. "And I wanted to thank you, Patricia, for not crushing what was exceptional in your son, because there are a lot of mothers who would have." That afternoon, after we left the police station, Marcus and I went to the house I've owned for 45 years now, the house where it all started with a broken pipe and a plumber's offhand comment. I made tea. We sat on the porch, and we didn't say much for a long time. Finally, Marcus said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I forgive you for everything, for wanting to fix me, for not understanding, for almost not letting me be myself." I started to cry. "I forgive you," he repeated, "because you finally got it. You finally understood. And you changed. And that's the thing that mattered." He put his arm around me. "I'm proud of you too," I said, "for everything you've done, for the lives you've saved, for the families you've brought closure to, but mostly for not letting anyone, not me, not your father, not the plumber, not the world, convince you that your sensitivity was weakness." "We both got there," Marcus said, "together. And I realized that this is what redemption actually looks like. It's not a single moment. It's not a grand gesture or a perfectly wrapped conclusion. It's a lifetime of showing up, of trying, of failing, and then trying again. It's choosing, every single day, to see the people we love for who they actually are, not who we thought they should be." The broken pipe in April 2019 exposed something in my basement. But more than that, it exposed something in me. All the fear I'd been carrying, all the dreams I'd abandoned, all the ways I'd almost unknowingly repeated my mother's cruelty toward my own son. But exposure isn't destruction. Sometimes it's the beginning of healing. Marcus still lives his life. He's made peace with his anxiety. He takes his medication. He does his work. He helps people find closure. And he's happy. Not in a simple way. Not without pain or struggle. But genuinely, deeply happy. I still write. I'm compiling my essays into a book now. Not about Marcus, but about motherhood and fear, and the courage it takes to let your children be exactly who they are. I've been contacted by magazines. I've been asked to speak. I'm finally, at 67 years old, doing something that actually lights me up. Jennifer still works in finance, but she consults with victim advocacy organizations on a pro bono basis. She's using her intelligence for something that matters. And my ex-husband? He comes to family dinners now. We're not rekindling anything, but we're building something real. A sense of family that survived the dissolution of our marriage, stronger than it was before. The plumber, Dave? He saw Marcus at the grocery store a few years back and said, "Your kid's doing real good things." I was wrong to call him loony. Marcus gave him a hug. Every single person in this story changed because one person cared enough to see. Because Marcus cared enough to notice pain in the world and couldn't look away. Because I was finally willing to stop running from my own disappointments and face them, and in doing that, I stopped trying to control my son's life. My mother, the one who crushed my dreams of being a writer, passed away 3 years ago. I spent time with her before she died, and I told her the truth about my life. I told her that I'd spent 40 years doing what she wanted instead of what I wanted. She was defensive at first, but then, toward the end, she softened. "I was afraid," she told me. afraid that dreaming too big would hurt you. That practicality would protect you from disappointment. I understood then that her cruelty had been born from fear, just like mine. That generational trauma isn't malicious. It's just fear passed down like an heirloom, wearing different faces in each generation. I know, I told her, and I forgive you. I meant it, because I finally understood that forgiveness isn't about absolving them of what they did. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of their choices. It's about deciding that you will break the cycle, not by being perfect, but by being honest. That's what happened in my family. We broke the cycle of misunderstanding not through perfection, but through brutal honesty and the willingness to change. And that's what I want to pass on to my grandchildren, however many Marcus and Jennifer might have. Not a legacy of achievement, but a legacy of courage. The courage to see. The courage to be seen. The courage to change. There's no moral here, really. No neat lesson wrapped up in a bow. Just the truth of what happened. A family that almost broke under the weight of misunderstanding, and how we found our way back to each other by finally learning to see. The plumber's warning wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. An invitation to look closer. To understand deeper. To love more courageously. And thank God I finally accepted it. In closing, I want to say this to anyone watching. If you have a child who sees the world differently, a child whose intensity frightens you, a child who can't stop noticing things, caring about things, seeing patterns that others miss, don't crush that. Don't medicate it away or ignore it or try to make it fit into a normal box. Protect it, nurture it, make space for it. Because the world needs people who care enough to see. The world needs people like Marcus. And if you are someone like Marcus, someone whose sensitivity is called weakness, whose obsession is called madness, whose ability to notice injustice is called a flaw, know this. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're just seeing more clearly than most people can bear to see. The gift of vision is also the burden of vision, but it's a burden worth carrying. This is Patricia Patterson, saying goodbye. I hope you've been watching. I hope you've heard the message underneath the story. And I hope, when you encounter someone in your life who seems a little too intense, a little too sensitive, a little too obsessed with things that others overlook, I hope you'll remember the plumber. I hope you'll remember Marcus. And I hope you'll choose to protect that exceptional thing in them instead of trying to fix it. Because the world doesn't need more people who are normal. The world needs more people who care.